Welcome back. Welcome back. Here we are, part two of chapter 8. And we're going to pick this back up here where we're really just trying to introduce this concept of branding. And so branding, obviously, most of us are familiar with brands because we buy brands every day. GW is a brand. The products that we buy, our iPhones, our iPads, the apparel that we wear, for the most part, most of us wear some type of branding. So the brand can be a name, a term, a symbol, a design. Nike probably has one of the most recognized symbols, the logo itself, which is that swoosh. Nobody, including myself, knew what a swoosh was until they created that brand for Nike. Again, that generally brands are shortcuts for us to remember what all the attributes are, good and bad, of a particular brand. And so it's a lot easier to translate, especially if it's a logo. You don't have to translate English words into various characters in other parts of the world. So branding is always going to be important for both products and services. Now, when we think about a package and a label, they serve similar purposes. I've also already mentioned the fact that packaging sometimes can be aesthetic, it can be functional, but it's really what we are first introduced to for a product when we see it on the shelves. And sometimes the packaging itself is there to catch our eye as we're walking down the aisle. Aesthetically, sometimes it's there for functional purposes. Like I gave you the example of the ACT oral rinse. They have a functional packaging that helps to enable people to properly use the right amount of that particular product to actually see the value. The label itself is also very important because it can provide lots of nutritional information. It can provide information about usage, some of the safety issues that might be important depending on the category. And also too, many of these things are there because the governmental regulations require them to be. And so no one can just put a label on there that says cholesterol free without adhering to some kind of standard as it relates to what is deemed to be free of cholesterol. So remember earlier we talked about this augmented product and the service product. Basically, companies must continually assess the value of customer service when it comes to obtaining ideas. So a lot of times on the label itself, we're going to find information that allows us to contact the company. And so if we really want to find out how to get service as it relates to products being broken or proper usage of it, oftentimes that will be included on the actual packaging and the labeling. And these days, a lot of companies, what they wind up doing is on their physical packaging, they will just send you directly to their website. And so if you want customer service, they may have an 800 number on their packaging, but by and large, they try to get us into their website, and they use that website to really talk about how they deliver service after purchase for their products that they sell. Another decision that a company needs to investigate or decide upon is what type of product line are they actually looking for. Generally, a product line is going to be a group of closely related products or services in terms of the functionality of it. And it's pretty much sold generally to the same customer group. And we'll see that there are many products that companies will have that will be determined by the different segments or niches that they might be trying to service in a particular marketplace. So some examples in terms of extending the length of a product line. Essentially, we're talking about the number of items that a company might have in its product line. So, for example, we might find that companies that have a product line that stretches to the more premium side of that particular product category, they might want to try to stretch their line downward and have a cheaper alternative. Apple's kind of going through a little of this right now with that iPhone 5C, the cheaper alternative. Right now, mixed results. I think by and large, what they're trying to do is they're trying to stretch down to that segment of the market that might be a little bit more price sensitive. And you have it also too where people kind of stretch up to the higher end as well. Some people argue that it's easier to stretch down, but you do run the risk of alienating your core group of what I would call premium buyers at that point. So I guess it really depends. And then also too, a lot of times when they engage in this kind of strategy, it's usually because, or many times it can be because they have excess capacity in terms of manufacturing. So if you meet the demand of the higher end or the lower end, but you realize you have excess capacity where you can produce a similar product using and getting some of the synergies of the production process, where you can stretch your line to the point where you can satisfy the segment at the opposite end of where you do business, it might make sense. It's not always going to be the case, but by and large, it's something that you could possibly consider. Okay. So again, a lot of times we're just trying to fill the line. And at the end of the day, there should be something that leads you to believe that there's unmet demand. Apple seems to believe that there is unmet demand at the lower end for people who just can't afford the current prices of the traditional iPhones. And so now we'll see. The jury's kind of out still on that. And so when we think about companies and their product mixes, we think about all the SKUs that companies have in their product mix. So think about all the different types of Colgate and Crest toothpaste that we can get by way of size or active ingredients, be it baking soda, or there may be some sort of tooth whitening component in it. It may even also include a co-branding component where they might have Scope as an active ingredient in it, the mouthwash Scope. So there are a lot of ways that we can kind of get to expanding out the mix of the products that we actually sell. So generally, a product mix width is a number of different product lines that the company carries, whereas the length is the total number of items the company carries within its product line. And if you go and you count up the SKUs or the stock keeping units, you'll be able to get to this whole length of it. You definitely see that in what I would call health and beauty aids category. You see it in cereal categories and many other different types of categories. But I think the important point here is that this whole notion of having products that are somewhat consistent, but they kind of tweak it just a little bit to tailor it to a smaller niche segment. But by and large, for example, when you buy Crest toothpaste, you buy the paste rather than the gel, and you have an active ingredient in there. There are many synergies where you're able to manufacture those things in a very cost-effective way. Now, what I want to do is I want to switch gears a little bit here and go from our discussion on physical products to have a brief discussion on this whole concept of services, and we'll kind of distinguish what are services themselves. Services can be what we receive from the government, and that could be in the form of, let's say, power. Generally, it might be in the form of health care if you're a senior citizen, waste management in your local district where you live, where people collect the garbage, they provide clean water. All those things that the government can provide are services. The private nonprofit stuff, you go to a hospital and you get treatment at the emergency room, that's going to be a medical service. The one that we're going to focus most on are these business services, which is really more the services that we actually consume on a day-to-day basis. And that could include an airline flight all the way down to getting dry cleaners services. But products and services do differ in a couple of ways. And we'll kind of take these one at a time. Generally speaking, they're going to be the opposite. Products tend to be tangible. You can physically hold them many times. You can smell them. You can taste them. You can obviously touch them. Generally speaking, services are intangible. There are a couple of exceptions. Generally, when you have things that represent the service, like a calling card as an example, might be one where you're looking at the service, but you can only get it if you have the card, which has the number attached to it. Services tend to be inseparable. So if you go and get your hair cut, unless you have a wig, you're going to have to sit there and have the person actually cut your hair. So you can't separate the production from the consumption. So there's this inseparability. Versus a product or service, you pick up a can of Campbell's soup in the supermarket. That soup was manufactured months ago. And so you don't have to be there on the assembly line to watch them make it. But a service, generally, you have to be there when you get the service. So delivery of service is consumed at the same time it's created. This whole notion of variability, because we're talking about people interacting, it's not like having a can of beans that is manufactured in a plant, or paper towels that are manufacturing at some paper mill somewhere. There is consistency in the manufacturing process. So if you buy a can of Campbell's beans in New York and you buy the same brand and you get them from a similar store, similar size, chances are it's going to be very similar in taste. Whereas services, there's so much variability because we're talking about people interacting with people. We're talking about service provider, and we're talking about customer interaction, but we're also talking about customer to customer interaction. Think about the last time you were on that airplane and you sat next to that drunk guy. That person had a profound impact or effect on the quality of the service that you got. Or you may have been in a bad mood the last time you went in to get your teeth cleaned at your dentist, and that had an impact on the quality of service. Or the service provider was in a bad mood and they interacted with a customer right before you. So the human component makes the delivery of good quality service very variable. Perishability. Generally speaking, when we think about services, we can't inventory them. So when that airplane takes off at Reagan National Airport, any seat that is empty will remain empty, and they can't inventory it and resell it at a later date. If you go to that concert that might be at the MCI Center, or I forgot what they call it today, but if you go and you watch a concert, if you choose not to go to the concert, you can't inventory that concert and watch it at a later date. You can watch film footage of it if someone records it, but the live experiential stuff that goes on when you go to a concert, you have to be there. Again, getting to this inseparability, you have to be there at the same time that the band is performing in order to get that live experience. Now, also, too, in addition to traditional marketing strategies, we kind of look at some additional strategies that kind of connect to this whole thing that we call services marketing. We're going to kind of take them one at a time. Just like in manufacturing, good service firms, they use marketing to position themselves strongly within a specific market. So, for example, FedEx has its promise where it talks about getting there faster and farther. Angie's List offers reviews you can trust. And so all these things really kind of communicate what is it that this particular firm stands for. So when we look at this thing called the value chain in terms of the service profit chain, we're talking about trying to connect the service to something that's measurable in terms of profitability. And usually it comes as a result of, better and superior delivery of the service, better overall perceptions of quality. Maybe you have a cost advantage in delivering a service. All these things kind of feed into providing something that's a little bit better than the next guy who's actually offering the exact same service. So because we're talking about people interactions and people interacting with people, it's really important that we get on the same page when it comes to hiring people and training people to deliver that great, superior customer service that we always believe that we want and providers believe that they can deliver on. Think about the company Zappos and how they indoctrinate their workers and pretty much make them believe that they are there to deliver superior customer service. Not great customer service or good customer service, but superior over anything else anyone else can provide. Actually, Zappos does a really great thing. I think they offer about, after you go through training when you're first hired, they offer you about $10,000 to quit right, maybe I think it's $2,000. They give you $2,000 if you want, right there on the spot if you want to quit and move on. And what they're trying to do there is to try to weed out those people who are just looking for quick financial gains. And so once you become part of that culture, it becomes contagious. And so internally, I mean, people are really looking at how they can essentially get people to buy into this customer service mantra. And so if you keep your employees happy internally, the whole goal, after all, is going to get people to deliver that very same superior service. So it's hiring the right people, training the right people, well, selecting the right people, hiring them, and then going out and training them to do a superior job. And Zappos does a really, really good job at that. Nordstrom's does a good job at that as well. The interactive marketing component really talks about the quality of the buyer-seller interaction during the service encounter. I probably have to add in here that you also have to look at the quality of the interaction between buyers. Because after all, for the most part, many times when we're getting service delivered from the service provider to us, we are in an environment with other customers. So sitting at a restaurant, part of the interaction that you're going to have with that service provider is also going to be affected by the interaction you might potentially have with other customers. So having a parent who has a relatively young child who just doesn't want to be out on a given night in a restaurant, crying for the hour that you're there at the restaurant can have an impact. So it can have an impact on how you perceive the relationship with the provider. And you may see less quality just because of all the other things that are going on within the environment itself. So generally these interactions here, I mean, it really points to the fact that maybe that might be a point of difference. So for example, if you're a service provider and you say, well, we want to make sure that we have a section in our restaurant where people can get away from certain things that might detract from the quality of service that they're getting. Used to be a time when smoking was very popular in restaurants, and so they gave us the option of smoking versus non-smoking. And so for smokers, it was an opportunity to smoke freely where they didn't have people look at them and kind of suggest that they should not smoke. But also, too, for non-smokers, you don't want to be in an environment, if you're a non-smoker, inhaling that stuff while you're actually eating. And so we have all sorts of things that we can do to kind of take segments and kind of separate them out so they can equally enjoy what's really good for them. Imagine going to a movie theater. We've all experienced that, where you have young teenagers who are there on a Saturday. Different kind of experience. Now the assumption is, though, sometimes the movie that people choose to watch segments people. So you're not going to have a bunch of 65, 70-year-old people going to a common movie with a bunch of 14, 15-year-olds. It can happen, but it's very rare. But let's assume that they do. Many times what you do is you adjust your pricing so you can give some motivation for people. Maybe seniors might want to come out a little bit earlier and you give them a discount during the day, and you kind of separate them out from the young kids who might want to come at the mall to hang out on the Saturday night. And so you can actually do some things to see if you can kind of get the interaction between users as well as users and providers a little bit more streamlined to deliver better quality and allows the providers to be a little bit more productive. Now, when we think about, again, differentiation and managing service environments, you have to really try to figure out what your corporate culture is. So, for example, at the Ritz-Carlton, they don't want their people to even use the word can't or won't or no. Because for them, that just sets up a mindset of I can't do or the impossible. So they really don't want their folks to actually to think about that. Again, in terms of looking at the offer, the delivery, the image that they're trying to represent with their particular brand. Nordstrom's, as an example, they have a no questions asked return policy. And we probably have all heard the stories of Nordstrom taking returns for products that they don't sell, like tires. They don't sell tires, but the old story goes that an elderly woman comes in to return tires and they gave her refund. But the fact is they don't sell tires. But for them, having this 100% no questions asked return policy was really important for them. Again, in terms of managing these things from a competitive advantage standpoint, the important point is service quality will always vary depending on the interactions between the employees and the customers. But I also got to add again, it's also about the interaction across customers. Think about what they back in Chicago they call them the bleacher bums, the people who go to Wrigley Field, who sit out in the bleachers and get plastered drunk. And so what they realize that is not a very family friendly environment. And so what they do is they set up a separate section for people who want to bring their young children. So you don't hear all the profanity and the stuff that goes on. And at the very same time, you don't alienate the people who come to that particular ballpark to kind of do what they do, in their small group. So again, trying to make people more compatible. And it creates an interaction with the service providers and the customers. It makes that a little bit more fluid and easygoing, because then you don't have the conflict within the customer ranks. So a lot of what we know in terms of service and being very productive and using it as a strategy, we learned from what we understand about generally the hiring strategies that companies have. So it's all about initially figuring out what skills set you need, and figuring out how you can actually hire, attract, and retain really, really good people. And so once you have really, really good people, you can train them in the right way, and motivating them and rewarding them in the way that really makes sense for them. Bonuses, little perks that you can possibly give them for performance well done. All these things translate into a really, really good experience from the provider to the customer. So it's about trying to keep the employees happy, and eventually they will keep the customers happy. Now, a couple of more points here related to the whole concept of branding. And this is across the board for products and service. So generally, think about this concept of brand equity. It's the differential effect, knowing that the brand name has a customer response to the product or its marketing. So in other words, what's the inherent value in the brand name Nike? And a lot of times, if you have brand equity built up, you can fall short on service delivery, you can fall short on product quality, and if people have had enough experience with you and it's been positive, they'll cut you some slack. If you have low brand equity, you fall short, and people will pretty much migrate to your competitors relatively quickly. So building brand equity is always going to be very, very, very important. So the question is, how do we build brands? I mean, brands are going to always be very important, but it's a matter of trying to figure out how is the best way to effectively manage brands. Okay, so real quickly here. Brand positioning, let's just take these one at a time. Brand positioning is kind of getting to the segmentation, targeting, and positioning point that we talked about in a previous chapter. where essentially what we're looking at here is um, what are the things that consumers look for? How do they evaluate you? And how do they match you up in their minds relative to competitive options? So the decisions you have to make are what are some of the attributes and benefits that you want to have associated with your particular brand? Again, relative to your competitors. Do you want to be known as the value oriented brand? Do you want to be known as the brand with the best customer service? AT&T has gone through a lot of problems over, the last decade or so when it comes to their mobile phones. The whole notion of the lack of coverage that they have, the number of drop calls that people have when it comes to using their services in certain areas of the country, they have been labeled and branded as a company that has inferior service. And the service that we're talking about here in this particular case is more so the coverage and the quality of the calls. And and Verizon has kind of used some of that in their advertising to make sure that they hit home the point that Verizon has a better coverage map and they have less drop calls. So then if you decide you want to create a brand, what are some of the things you need to consider when it comes to selecting a brand name? A brand should suggest the benefits and the quality of what you have. I mean, I've actually purchased a beauty rest bed, but you think about it, the name beauty and rest, it just makes it sound so comforting and comfortable. A die-hard battery that brand is, many decades old. But what it says is it doesn't matter what happens weather-wise, this particular battery is not going to die. Vaseline intensive care is another example, and how people look at that as a brand that's kind of synonymous with relieving chapped hands. Curves, which was I think it's still there. It's a women's workout club facility, fitness club around the country, and it kind of suggests more so of a body type. So again, the name itself is suggestive of the target market and the benefits. It should be easy to pronounce, and it should be recognizable, something that's not controversial, making sure it's not offending anybody. The brand name should be distinctive in some way. What I like about Zappos, it's a variation of the Spanish word zapatos, which means shoes. Again, also very easy to trademark, or easier to trademark than a generic name or term. It should be extendable. Amazon did a great job in creating their brand. If they had started out as something related to books, which is how they got their start, it would have been more difficult for them to then branch out into all the different things that they're into right now. Amazon is a very, very universal name. It is synonymous with being expansive because we're talking about a very large river in the world. And the name should also translate easily into foreign languages, like I said before. So you want to make sure that the actual brand itself translates well and is not offensive. Many times it's really better to have a name and a logo like Nike, because there you don't have to worry about translation issues. That's not going to be a problem for a company like Nike, because then again, it took them so many years to kind of build up that reputation. And then it should be capable of registration, copyright, and more trademark and service mark registration. So again, protecting your rights and not allowing people to use your particular product or service. And real quickly, a couple more points here when it comes to just general brands. We've seen a trend that's been going on in physical products primarily, where retailers have been selling a lot more private label brands. Great Value is a very, very popular brand name that Walmart sells. The manufacturer brands will be the ones that are sold by the actual manufacturers themselves. And so that's going to be your Kellogg's Corn Flakes versus Great Value Flakes. Many times the manufacturing of those products are done by the exact same companies that sell the national brands. But these private label brands have become very, very, very important over the years. Licensing is also something that's very important in terms of branding, which kind of ties into co-branding. So especially for kids products, you'll see that there are a lot of products that are licensed. They tend to be characters that kids love: Dora the Explorer, SpongeBob, SquarePants, Barbie. All these things are many times put on the packaging for cereals and snacks, and they're really trying to appeal to the kids, and they're always going to be for the little youngsters where they see the picture of Dora Explorer in the packaging, and it's going to be at eye level visually when the child is in the cart, so they can very easily reach for it and put it into the cart, and then mom's going to buy it. And finally, I want to take a few minutes to talk a little bit about the structure and matrix that can kind of organize our thoughts in terms of, looking at products. So again, we're looking at product categories, and we're looking at types of brands, new versus existing. Let's just take them one at a time. So when we think about line extensions, and a good example would be Cheerios. There are all sorts of Cheerios: Honey Nut Cheerios, multigrain Cheerios, banana nut Cheerios. Again, all those extending the line of the existing brand of Cheerios. We also have some brand extensions. Mr. Clean is a brand that's been around. It's synonymous with cleaning, obviously, given the brand name, kind of getting back to that name, associating it with the actual benefits. But now we're seeing them come out with a lot of different products. The Magic Eraser, which kind of helps to clean fingerprints off walls. Parents love that kind of product. Also, too, they have something called the Magic Reach, which is a product that they can use to actually clean toilet bowls. So again, trying to benefit from an existing brand name to come out with some new products. Pepsi has had, Coke, they've all had these what we call multi-brand strategies. So Pepsi has a line of products all looking at different types of consumers in terms of what they like in soft drinks. Traditional Pepsi, we have Sierra Mist, which is a relatively new product. Slice, which is sort of the competitor at the time of 7-Up and Sprite. And so we're looking at sort of like a lemon lime kind of feel to it, although Sierra Mist is very similar to Slice, actually. And also, too, they have Amp energy drinks. So again, the important point is here, they are developing new brands for new or existing categories or of drinks. And then we also have those who are just looking at new brands, completely new brands. This example that I think I've given a few times in class, it's kind of tying into what we're talking about in terms of extending the market as well. Companies like Toyota and Nissan and Honda, once they get to the point where they've pretty much stretched out the branding that they could for Toyota, as an example, but there's still a market that was untapped. 24 years ago, they decided to actually go higher in terms of the branding itself, and they built the Lexus brand. And so they couldn't ask anybody to pay more at the time than about $40,000 for Toyota Avalon, which is their marquee Toyota brand. It's the highest end you can get there. But there were many people out there willing to spend $50,000, $60,000, $70,000 for a car, but not with the Toyota brand on it. And so that's when they created the actual brand that they call Lexus. And Honda did it with Acura, and Infiniti is the brand for the Nissan brand. With, I think, mixed success. I think Lexus is probably the one that differentiates itself more successfully with the core brand of Toyota. Many Lexus owners will tell you they do not drive a Toyota. I happen to drive an Acura, and I realize I drive a Honda. Same thing with Infiniti. I think most people who drive an Infiniti realize they're driving a Nissan, but for some reason those Toyota drivers, they believe that they're driving a Lexus, which they are, but you can't tell them that it's an actual Toyota. Anyway, so that wraps up chapter 8. And so what we're going to do is we're going to morph into chapter 9. And so then I will actually see you on the other side with chapter 9.